Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Todd Talks. Today we are talking about gods and divine intervention, and not really necessarily the ability that clerics have. Gods are a really dicey thing when it comes to D&D because that's all expectation and fear, especially for me as a dungeon master. How do you role play a god for players and make that feel like a satisfying interaction? And I think that's something a lot of dungeon masters struggle with, especially when it comes to if you're trying to create, if you're trying to represent a god as all-knowing and just having a giant presence. I think that's the hardest thing to ever accomplish in D&D, and I tend not to go that way. I tend to go towards the more Greek, Norse mythology. But I'd like to hear what everyone else would like to say. And I would like to say beforehand, if you are a fan of Heroes of the Veil, major spoilers if you have not seen the previous episode. If you've not seen the previous episode, please leave. You will be very upset by what we talk about soon. I am joined today with Hope LaVelle, who is a fantastic role player and actress and sneaky god. Lauren Urban as well, who is on Heroes of the Veil and has had to make a lot of godlike decisions lately. And Jim Davis, who is just a D&D god. So yeah, let's dive in. How does everyone feel about gods in D&D and how to portray them and interact with them? It's a big question.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I don't want to just jump right in. Like,
yeah.
Go for it.
All right. So I kind of like them either the way Eberron handles them, as like distant figures of myth, and like there's something out there, like somewhere celestials come from somewhere, but it's like sort of beyond our ability to comprehend or like reach, or there's so many gods that like it's like, you know, they're vermin. They're just all over the place. You know, it's like every city has their own patron god, and then like, but it's like a world full of demigods and godlings and like river spirits that pose as gods, or monsters that convince other people that they are actually gods. And it's more like that than like, you know, Zeus stepping down from Olympus, you know, that kind of thing.
How about for you, Lauren? You've had some recent experiences and having interactions with gods. Some of those may be disappointing.
Well, who knows? For the characters, maybe. For me, it's always interesting. As a player, I definitely go with whatever the world is doing, and certainly Heroes of the Veil has been full of deities, especially for a cleric. For my home games and for my streamed games, I actually take a lot of inspiration from the David Eddings books, which include whole pantheons of gods that everyone is very aware exist, but for reasons have had to step away from the world and be really careful about how they interact, because all it takes is two gods deciding to go to war and the entire world gets destroyed. So I tend to, in a similar way, have them as distant figures that are still, in a weird way, omnipresent and can give powers and things, but are not necessarily always interacting with everybody in the material plane, because, you know, if this god does this, then this god over here feels like they can also do that, and then it's just a power creep, and then gods are at war. So yeah, I tend to go that way, but as a player interacting, especially playing a character who is a cleric and having to pray to one or several gods, that can be an interesting, frustrating moment of like, you're giving me this power, but you're not telling me what to do with it. So it's a weird line to have to cross, because yeah, once you have gods that just walk amongst the world, now players have to deal with that.
Yeah, that's not only a role-playing challenge for the dungeon master, but then you're putting a law on your players as well. Like, like how do I show awe? Do I show awe? Do I not care at all? You know, and that's a big deciding moment that sometimes, if you're not prepped for that in a campaign, which I would say almost always you were not ready for that kind of moment, it's hard to know how to role play that and also not die. If you anger a god, they may just wink you out of existence.
But it's an amazing moment, and amazing, especially if you're playing a paladin or a cleric or something that is that connected, or a warlock.
Right, absolutely. So Hope, You got to recently play a god.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you?
Oh man, stressful. To say the least. There were so many layers to that. I mean, I was just a dude playing a dude pretending to be another dude. I don't know. It was so many layers. Really exciting thing because, like, I mean, if we go back to what Lauren said, I mean, I am used to playing druids, so my gods are usually the old gods. They're usually nameless gods. I usually don't have to role play, so much playing into pooling power from those gods is more just from nature. I do have a druid that I play who has, the god of Nagakiboros, which is, the great serpent, which is basically Cthulhu, which is really fun to be able to pull from that sort of stuff. But once again, it's an old god, and you don't really have to interact so much. It's more just about adding to your role play. And now then when we joined for Heroes of the Vale, and Mike Merles was like, oh yeah, all the gods just walk around in the Vale, and they're just like everyone else. And I'm just like, I couldn't wrap my head around that because I was just so used to gods being gods, and now they're just everywhere. And then as we played through Heroes of the Vale and all the interactions that we had, and when Pelor appeared, and we could see a god being weak and dying, and the fact of when you Todd, when you talked about that moment when Orkira, Lauren's character, tried to heal Pelor with Pelor's power, you just saw Pelor shrink, and you could see the power being sucked from it. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so amazing to see that we get to interact with gods. And then the layer of bringing in your god Saranthus, when you were like, hey, you'd like message me and you're just like, hey, what if you were Saranthus? And I'm just like, what am I supposed to do with that? So that was another layer of like, suddenly I'm just being introduced to gods and gods and gods, and suddenly I'm playing a god. It was it's been a very huge experience that I could delve into about Saranthus a lot. I did so much research, and you should see pictures of my gameplay. I had like C-stands with like notes just like next to me, so I could be like, Saranthus does this, and this is her backstory, and this is her character sheet, but I have to pretend that I'm using this character sheet. And so yeah, I could ramble on about it all day.
Yeah, especially for Jim, like to catch Jim up. This is like one of those weird D&D situations where we need like, you wanted someone to appear powerful, and
Sure.
Instead of, she was a recently escaped god, so her challenge rating was within the bounds of the entire party. But you did want her to be able to do this thing, which is basically destroy their entire flying fortress of Stormharrow.
Because you're trying to take it out.
And beyond role playing, the math of that, how to make that work and make everyone watching who are super crunchy about stuff, was kind of like impossible. Because
Todd and I like,
we had like we probably had a 4-hour conversation. Because you want it to be satisfying, you want them a chance to stop it.
Sure.
And on top of that, it's about like, I had never played. She's a wizard, right? I think I remember correctly. Now it's all such a blur.
Partially wizard,
but I had never played a wizard before. And so that on top of that, like, oh, I'm playing in front of thousands of people, playing a wizard, playing a god for the first time in my life. Oh my gosh, I hope I don't mess this up. But on top of that,
and trying to pretend to be someone else at the same time, so none of us knew that.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. This was a great exercise.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's a really fun challenge, though.
Well, but the hardest challenge was Todd and I spent hours on the phone the night before being like, okay, so if this happens, then I'll do this. And then we're trying to lay it out. And for me, I'm an improver. That's where my background comes from. I love to improv. And then when you put in the stress of like, we're trying to prepare something, but it still is improv, and it kind of gets me in my head a little bit, but because you can't just like react, you kind of have to have these things that need to happen for the story and stuff.
Like a specific outcome kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was probably the hardest goal, because you don't know how the players are going to react. I told Todd, I'm like, we're going to talk ourselves blue, and then tomorrow we're not even going to know what happens, because I did not think people would attack me, and that's the first thing that they did.
I've I figured that would happen.
Oh no!
I did like that. Everyone's role playing was fantastic in the way that, like, especially like Keen is just like, I don't know what's happening. Like characters are like legit. Like no one's like, okay, round one, let's attack. Like most everyone was just like, what? like just deer in headlights. Like, which is the best way to role play it. But it was a situation where we had to destroy a flying fortress or to make it not function. And in 5th edition D&D, there's only one way to do that. And that's anti-magic shell, and then maybe casting shatter, which is one of the few spells that can target actual objects. And that broke like the pillar of the base of the fortress. And
tell them about the glitch that we found, the loophole.
Oh yeah, but here's the problem: anti-magic shell. So how does she cast shatter? And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And she read it, and she's like, except for when it comes from a deity, the magic is suppressed.
I am a deity.
All magical, anti-magic shell is weird because it suppresses all magical effects and resiliences. For
it's like if it's
any magical item, unless it's an artifact or it's a deity. Yeah, so that was her loophole in how she could still cast magic, which is nasty.
Makes perfect sense, it's just it's like for mortal magic, come on, it's a deity. You can just get past that.
Yeah.
And I think like it raises a good point, because it's like if you're trying to like stick to the rules and not just hand wave everything, like, there is a fine line to balance there, because you could easily just like wipe out everybody. Like why not summon a meteor swarm on the thing, or why not disintegrate all of it or something like that. So there has to be limits on it, and I think that's what's interesting about D&D gods, is that they're not unlimited. And like they can be if it's homebrew, you make it up, whatever, but most of the time, like in their spheres, they're ultra powerful, but outside of them, they're just like, I don't know. I think that calling them gods is buying into their own propaganda. Like, like that they are ultra powerful beings. They're entities on a cosmic level that can affect things on a multiverse, wide scale. But are they like gods? Well, they can be killed. They can be, tricked. They can be made mortal. They can be messed with. And if it's a setting like Forgotten Realms, then there's something above even the gods that's like, I don't even need worshipers. Like, I don't care if you know about me or not. It doesn't matter whether you puny nothings believe in me. I'm here to keep the gods in line. So personally, I'm just waiting for the role-playing game where you get to it and your RPG character breaks the fourth wall, realizes they're in a game, and that their player character is the true god, and that's the person that they serve. But that's for another time. That's like the 20th level ability is you're a pen and paper, your stats.
Well, and that's something I've always taken to heart is I like the idea of, and I'm like literally writing a book about this right now, about kind of a god hustle. Like it's like I'm kind of, and it's based on my character Eberron, who is just the used car salesman of deities, if he's even that. He's like he's really actually lower than most people in the real world, but he's found a few loopholes. But I like the idea that some clerics can actually in the 5th edition rules can be philosophy clerics, and I think that's the kind of loophole that you're talking about, where okay, if that's true and you can just get the magic from the plane of existence itself, then maybe all the gods have been running a hustle on everybody this entire time. It kind of opens that, like, if everyone's getting their magic from the same spot, it poses a lot of interesting questions.
If you look at how the standard D&D gods behave, they are all terrible to each other. Like, why are we all mad at orcs when like everybody took all their stuff, and then like the elf god came along and plucked out their god's eye? And like, I'd be mad too. It's like they're all terrible to each other, and so it's only one of those things where we only play one side of this fight usually, and the more we mix up the sides, the more we're like, oh yeah, you can play orcs and drow and kobolds and all that other kind of stuff. Then you break down a lot of
the orcs. Like I believe they worship Grumsh because the orcs were given nothing. They were given no place to live. They are a displaced a race of creatures, and so it's shocking that they would suddenly be invading everyone. If you want to look at like like the history of Vikings, right? Like we have no food because everything's frozen, so we're just gonna steal everything that's in our path. Not a huge shock, right? And then elves have kind of an absentee father mother, right? Like they weren't even. Their elves are an accident.
Like, right. And is it the same? Is it the same Corellan that's on Greyhawk, that's in Faerun, that's in your home game?
Right.
Like, so I think all of those things are like foundational things if you're world building to think about, especially if you're going to have a cleric, you're going to have like divine soul sorcerers and stuff, because you owe it to those players to be able to say like, yeah, you don't want to mess with the war god in a fight, but he's just get him drunk and it's easy to trick him. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what you're saying. Like, sorry to keep rambling, but like the Greek and Norse myths is, to me, Thor is like, and he's a drunkard. He's not a hero. He's, you don't want to mess with him. He's got an awesome hammer, but there's a reason his wife cheats on him. He's a lout. He's a brute, and easily angered and
not bright.
I like it when not bright. I like it when the gods are just people but extra. Is a good way. That's sort of my way I try to think.
Yeah, that's kind of hard for me to follow, because when you think of a god, you put them up on a pedestal. They're these great beings, and I've literally felt like my whole world's been kind of flipped upside down through D&D, where it's like, oh yeah, these gods have flaws, and I never really even think to acknowledge that, because I'm like, oh, but they're gods. So what makes them gods if they're just as flawed as humans? So it's like,
sure.
But I'm always waiting for that. Yeah, I'm always waiting for that
Lauren.
moment in the campaign where you get to level 20 or 17, 18, whatever's going on. And then you get to go start taking down gods or godlike beings. And that thought of, well, what is the difference between a god and a level 20 wizard? Not much. Not that much. And so if the power is there, then why not all the flaws and the issues and the foibles and the problems that we have? Why wouldn't they have it too?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Like you can become even more if you're living forever, think about the psychological damage. I mean, even as I get older, I feel like I have more things wrong with me, not less. Right? Like if someone's initially very arrogant, they become supremely arrogant, or they believe in their own hype. These gods, when they have flaws, those flaws can just become increasingly worse, and they can be increasingly caricatures of other normal creatures that live on the planet, but also or something deeply alien where you don't understand where they're coming from at all anymore. You have that kind of Watchmen effect, right? Like the most powerful being doesn't quite understand people anymore, and it robs them of humanity at that point.
For me, I think a good resource to sort of put yourself in that mindset and is to study pre-Christian religions, especially those that came in this time in the Mediterranean. At least I'm gonna get crazy deep history on for just a second, but
Zoroastrianism, old mythology is very interesting too.
Any of the Hellenistic religions, Neoplatonism, they bear enough similarities to Christianity, so they got angels and things like that, but they are distinctly pagan. And so it's this weird mixture of the two that's right before Christianity takes off, that is this polytheistic, everybody just kind of worships whoever they, am I going sailing? I worship the sea god. Am I trying to plant something? I worship the fertility god. And I think it was helpful for me because it's it's a world in which gods are seen as not all knowing, not all powerful, but powerful beings to bargain with. I will do this if you do that kind of relationship. I'll say this prayer or make this sacrifice or, make this donation in your name or build a temple in your name if you do this thing for me. It was very transactional, very matter of fact and pragmatic. And so to me, that changed how I saw D&D gods. And I was like, and they might build cathedrals, but this is pagan. They just have a different attitude about it. So, I don't know. It's helpful for me.
Has everyone here interacted with a god in D&D, and what's your best moment? What's your worst? Have you heard this mad god and been disappointed? Wow. Okay, I may have already answered this.
I'll let somebody else go first.
You go ahead, Jen. No, you. That's all right.
Okay, so go ahead, Lauren, please.
I'll just keep it short. My best, Heroes of the Veil, the moment where Orkira met Pelor was probably the best. And then the episode later, when she realized how much Pelor didn't tell her about things, it's probably the worst.
You felt
Yeah,
like
that's hard.
manipulated almost.
With him, okay, with Saranthus is a whole different thing.
Right, but with
like,
Pelor not telling you things, you know?
yeah, and like she had this, well, she hasn't had it yet because we haven't gotten there yet, but she definitely had this moment of not just, why didn't you tell me this? Because, why? There's also, because what was going on with her, there was this moment of guilt of, well, maybe he didn't tell me because he's not a god anymore. But also it was like, but this looks like it's in your best interest to tell me this. Why didn't you? And so that weird moment of not understanding why, which I think is part of what makes gods difficult and amazing to play and to play against, is because they have different motivations, or they have different senses of what's important. And so that moment of the mortal going, why didn't you just tell me, definitely coming up against that.
Okay, Jim.
So a long time ago, I had a player, actually Travis, our producer, was playing a rogue, and he'd always want to go off and do roguey stuff by himself and get a lot of gold and loot and stuff. And we had a good time doing these solo adventures. And at some point, he sort of like came up with the idea that the goddess of love, sort of this fertility, Sune type Aphrodite goddess, he wanted to get her attention and have her fall in love with him. And so we sort of like crafted this narrative where the god of law he was such a great criminal and such an astounding thief that the god of law was like, listen, you can't just let this guy run around. He's flouting the laws of multiple countries. It's just like running roughshod over our institutions and everything. So he sends a bunch of paladins after them. They end up catching him. They execute him, and this is all just in one-on-ones with me and Travis. He's like, you're there in the afterlife. The god of law is about to take you to whatever celestial prison, and it's your goddess intercedes because you lived a life worthy of sort of impressing her. And she was like, yeah, you can come with me in my paradise for the rest of your life. And it sort of spawned in the game world an order of devotion. It would be devotion paladins men and women who attempt to live a life worthy enough to impress this goddess so that they're taken to her paradise at the end. And they just hope that by, being worthy, being heroic, being good to themselves and true to themselves and others, that she'll sort of find favor on them. And I feel it was a cool way to do devotion paladins, for one. It was like a different take on them, but it was this really fun interaction between a player and a god that they kind of, I just had like a name on a list. I didn't have anything else about her. Sort of fleshed out the religion of it, and then these interactions that they had after his character died, and then she eventually brought him back for something else, like an epic level game we ran. The worst one was the same group. They tried. I think I mentioned last time they tried to use the deck of many things to wish all of those ill-gotten goods away, and that's when that didn't work. They tried to destroy the deck of many things, which is when the god of fate came down and been like, "You can't do that. That's my artifact." And then I was just like, "The game ends. You can't. Like, we're done." Like, it's. I think we just started over and did something else like the next week. But it was just
for me. I feel like that's when the game begins. when you make the god of fate angry at you, that's when things get interesting, man.
Like, you can't change. You can't destroy a deck of many things like that. So yeah, it was.
I'll just be taking that. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. Right. Now, most of the time, I either have players who play clerics of like a philosophy or a worldview, and not necessarily like gods, or they play clerics of gods who are just like crappy people who have a bunch of power. They're just like monsters who convince this one person I'm a god. And then,
right, I have a cleric that I adore, and he's my sweet boy. His name is Rend, and he is a construct. And he is just the amalgamation of like several different magical items that were left all sitting there over too much time in a dark cave, and he became sentient.
Nice.
And actually, my wife kind of built him, but he's like, man, I'll like sap and bark and like a helm of telepathy. He's like very much like Mark I Ultron, right? Like really horrifying to look at. But he firmly believes, and he's like, okay, well, I just came out of the muck. so I believe in muck. And so he's a forge cleric. That's all he
nice.
just believes in, is like making stuff, and that's what he does. And
Mhm.
sometimes, very often, unmaking things as well. And it's a fun cleric to play when someone just believes in a philosophy. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of like scarier sometimes for a cleric. Like if someone's just like, I'm into death, and they're not given any guidance from a god, they're just like, I believe in death. I'm like, you terrify me, because you don't even have rules. Like you
Definitely.
are just this psychopath. How about for you, Hope? How are what are your favorite god interactions?
You know, it's hard to pinpoint because like I said, I usually don't play characters who have to deal with gods, but my character in the game that TJ Storm DMs is, he always does amazing homebrew stuff that just makes everything more epic and cinematic, because that's how he runs. But I'm playing a character who does rely, even though she's a druid, she relies so much on her god. She carries her god's eye with her everywhere she goes, and she uses it to do things. And she can actually see, like, her god will lead her the right path, because of, she'll see, like, the tentacles of Cthulhu or whatever show up and guide her. And I think that that's just been a really great way for role playing. But I can't think of like a very specific point, because honestly, my favorite interaction with the god I already talked about was with Lauren's character, and watching Paylor like be sucked of his own power to heal himself. Like, it was just like, it still is a mind-blowing moment for me. Yeah, I can't get over that.
It did kind of put divinity into like sharp reality, right? Like it was
Yeah.
just a moment of like, it's coming from somewhere. Like, like you're taking
And
water
that
out of
somewhere
this well.
isn't infinite.
Yes, and when you think about like that makes you retrospectively think back to every spell you cast in the name of your god, and every prayer that you make is like sucking their life force or whatever. Like it really makes you really think back to like, oh wow, this is where it comes from. That's so cool.
Yeah. It raises an
What,
interesting question about the
yeah.
nature of divine magic, right? Like, is it like the source, if it's from the god, and the clerics are able to sort of like draw it out, does the god have a control over that somehow? Or is it just like once a cleric devotes themselves to a god, it's like, well, this is who I got. Like I can't, like I don't have, the god doesn't, maybe doesn't have, I don't know, they would like explicit out like, yeah, I think my internet's maybe messing up a bit. Okay, good. So like in older versions of D&D, you'd have you'd say first and second level spells are yours. They're from your faith or your power or something. And then like third and fourth and fifth level are from these angels. And then eventually you get like the highest level are from your god yourself. So if you like did something to upset them, there were different grades that the god could be like, well, I'm taking away your two highest spell levels. Like you'll still have your first and second levels or whatever, but you've upset me, you've broken one of the tenets of the faith. You've still got the magic that you have inherent in you, but until you've atoned or whatever, you're cut off from the good stuff. And so like I've always kept that with me, where it's like I kind of like the restrictions of that. I kind of like that the cleric has to sort of deal with the weird taboos that their god might throw at them in the same way a warlock does, or certain kinds of wizards. And I think it adds an element to the interaction between a cleric and their deity if the cleric has to like sacrifice something or toe the line in some ways that they might not want to, especially if there's a conflict there, like a hot-headed lawful good cleric or something like that who's prone to acting rashly and then realizing, oh, that's not the best way to accomplish my goals after the fact, or something, where the flaw is in the mortal side of things.
Do you ever play with alignment at all? Because actually, Mike Morrell's mentioned this to me once, and it kind of resonated with me. In the world of, in a world purely filled with lawful good, where lawful good is in charge, the last one in prison is neutral good. Does lawful good get to the point where lawful good is just evil? Like, because you've broken the law. Like by very nature of playing a character that is neutral good, under those restrictions, like, does evil kind of get redefined if you're so extreme about that alignment choice.
Sure. I mean, I think like that's the problem with the corner religions, or not religions, but the corner alignments that are, the lawful
Right.
good, chaotic good, whatever. So it's like there are contradictions there. Because what my first reaction is like, why would the neutral good person be put in prison if it was a lawful good society? That's law tempered with mercy and compassion. So it's like, wouldn't they see, like, if they broke the law, maybe it's like, well, they have a fine or something. And to me, that speaks maybe more of like a lawful neutral, but. You could have tension in that society. The tension could be between, the lawful side and the good side, and that sometimes one or the other is more ascendant. I mean, I like alignment. I think it's an interesting tool to use, but I also think it's a spice that you use sparingly to enhance your games, not that you just only use. So yeah, I can see that, but that's Dragonlance, right? Like that's what happened with the Cataclysm in Dragonlance. That's why the Circle of Eight exists in Greyhawk, is to like prevent those situations where even lawful good. I know for me, I wouldn't want to live in a chaotic good society. That sounds
no
crazy unstable.
it would be the purge every day.
It doesn't sound like a society.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't necessarily out. So
when you look at Dragonlance and those gods, I mean, and it is like this horrible thing that you have to resolve, because you one of the main characters is not a main character, a side character is very much in this Gandalf role as Fizban. And he is actually, spoiler alert, he's Paladin. He's the god of good, and arguably Bahamut, and he is partially responsible for the destruction of the world because they're a high priest was so arrogant, and he told the gods to serve him, and all the gods got together and said, "Nah, we're gonna throw a meteorite right at your city and crack the world." A lawful good god got in on that.
Yeah.
So I like those flaws. I don't like that flaw. Yeah. I don't want to experience that flaw. But it shows you that like a Paylor could do something horrible, and certainly could be withholding or not necessarily respectful entirely of his followers. It depends on how you want to play it and how you want to see it. But I think gods are tricky. But
and good for who? Like there's or whom or whatever, but there's what's good for the world or the cosmos might not necessarily be good for the party or the city. It's gods operating on a different scale. Their sense of morality and how alignment defines them is maybe even just different. It's maybe is more absolutist, and so you get weird things where it's like, the lawful good god's going to do something really terrible because that's just what a god does, regardless of the portfolio. So I think it's make for interesting stories.
Yeah, a real quick question for Lauren Irvin. You play a lot of clerics, don't you?
Yeah, I play quite a few.
What is the attraction to clerics for you?
It's twofold. I like being the support class a lot of the time, and also I like filling in the gaps in player parties. So, and cleric sadly is one of those that gets the short shifts. People want to go and do major sneak attack damage, or they want to shoot things, or they want to turn into things, or they want to do all the things. And sadly, healing people isn't the thing that always comes up first on everybody's list. And
it's so important.
I look at it's super important. And fortunately in D&D, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You don't have to be a healer. You don't have to be a cleric to be a healer. But I feel like if I'm going to fill that role, I might as well fill it with the one that makes the most sense. So yeah, it was unintentional. My first 4th edition character was a cleric for that exact reason, as I sat down at the table and that was the thing that was missing. So and since then that's just become a continuing theme in my D&D life is, no, y'all need a healer. Okay, yeah, I can do this. So
it's also good that you're theming the D&D community as well. You're just like you are the support. You're the one healing everyone.
Mama bear.
I try.
You're on every live stream.
But it does like I do like that support role, and it is interesting to then take that character and be like, okay, this is what the party needs, and come up with what kind of character do I want to play out of that? And then for me, the god part of it comes after I decide what kind of character I'm going to be. So the you know, to decide who or what my character worships is always secondary to what does my character want. And very rarely do they have a devotion to a god before they then become a cleric. It's usually the other way around. They usually stumble upon a god who fits in with what they kind of want anyway. So we have questions from chat also.
Okay,
More
let's
questions
know.
for me. Yeah, sure. I've got a question from Watch Devon Die, who asks, how do you consider pantheons of previously mortal individuals that ascend to godhood versus primordial forces that are worshipped as gods? What's more interesting to use as a D&D or as a DM?
Whoa.
I love primordials. Yeah,
I had no idea. None.
Yeah, no. I was pretty excited too, and I mean, absent of me, you had an obsession with the Phoenix, and I was like, yes. The way I handle gods and primordials is, yeah, gods are the smart ones, but the primordials are they're like an idea. So I don't think not all of them are smart. Some of them might be, but I have made a primordial who is my baby boy. I love how deliciously strange he is because he is this one all-consuming thought, and I like playing primordials as that. So they're not necessarily fountains of wisdom. They are a hurricane. They are a mountain. They are this fundamental part of the universe that just exists, and maybe they are the beginning of something else. But primordial is exactly what the word makes them sound like they are. That they're this unstoppable force, and they were maybe there far beforehand, before the gods, and maybe they're very long after. And that simplicity is what makes them powerful and hard to destroy, and also terrifying. Because they're above anyone else, I would say a primordial can easily see everyone else as just ants, if they see them at all. So that's how I play that. You may have different views.
I like the idea of them preceding deities, though.
You do like that? Yeah.
Yeah. I like it because it fits with like the way that the Great Wheel cosmology sort of is, where it's like the inner planes, if they're the first, and then the emanations from them give rise to the material, which then has people on it who believe and have, they project their consciousness through the astral plane to give birth to the gods that they then venerate. Is sort of how I've run it before in my games, where that's the order of it, and then the gods just tell everybody, "Yeah, we made all this."
And there's like precedent in Norse mythology, right? Like there's Ymir and his giant cow, and somehow this causes a bunch of gods to show up. Like just out of the ether, these things keep happening. And so I think it's kind of fun for you, Hope. You being that you play druids, that's kind of like primordials are kind of the answer to that, right? Like, where is this power coming from? And
right.
Also, why doesn't it not communicate so much with you?
Right.
Right.
I of course prefer primordials because there is that awe sense of that they're bigger than us. They know better than us. When they give us a duty of some sort, then we know to follow it without question, because I mean, at least in my mind, that's how I play it and see it, is that gods that walk among us they're just super amazing characters, basically, with flaws and stuff. But for me, I feel like primordials I'm more likely to follow blindly, especially with like just nature. You can't go wrong with nature. Nature always knows best. Nature always knows how to balance. And that with alignments, I usually always play a neutral of some sort, and just to do what is right for the moment, what's right for nature. I find that I'm glad that is a game mechanic that we can play off of.
What? How do you feel about primordials, Lauren? You have recent experience.
I feel like you should get back to me in about 5 or 6 more episodes, and I'll tell you exactly how I feel about primordials. From a player standpoint, get back to me in a couple weeks. From a DM standpoint, I haven't used them very much, although now that they're statted out, I find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
I find the fact that there's always been this idea in especially later editions of D&D of no, we're not going to stat you out gods if we can avoid it, because then you're just going to want to fight them, versus nope, here's the Leviathan and here's the Phoenix and here's the this and here, just go nuts, go fight them, because yeah, they should be on a power level equal to a god, just in a different way. So it's I definitely feel like statting them out did encourage me as a DM to be like, all right, so what if a Leviathan just showed up in my game? What would happen? But it's got to have that different flavor. It can't be the same type of thing. But maybe one of these days I'll play a warlock and start getting my power from something. That'd be fun. Just be a force of nature without any of the nature part of it. Sorry, Hope.
So
you want some
unnatural.
more? Yeah, I know, right? Warlocks. They're fun.
I love warlocks. Are there any more questions in chat?
Oh yeah, I have tons. We've got Lawful Pessimist, since we were just talking about alignments, asks, do you believe I know, right? Do you believe players should understand the origin of a god's divine power, or is it best kept a mystery?
Oh, that's very personal. I mean, it depends on what kind of game you want to run. Yeah. I like seeing the math of it. Kind of. It's weird. It's like that Palor moment where he loses a little bit of his energy when you pray to him. I mean, that put it in sharp relief of like, oops, okay, so this is how this plays out. But yeah, I mean, if it just, that's such a personal experience. I think that varies from to player and DM to DM, and that's a good conversation to have if you can without spoiling the things that come up. How about for all you?
I wonder if it's different for gods that are in the books that are basically listed for you versus creating your own god, because I feel that's really important if you're going to work with a player. I have a player in one of my groups who is a cleric of a goddess that we've created together. That came out of an idea of like what she would want to worship, and because of that, we've talked a lot more about who she is and where she's come from and where her power comes from and what her beliefs are. And we've had to dig into it a lot more, and it's been really interesting. But I don't know if I've ever done that with any of my other players who have just used one of the gods that have the blurb in the book. So I think it's also dependent on how much homebrew are you really looking to do.
Also, it's intimidating, right? We're at 5th edition D&D. Like, there a lot of people have hard opinions on deities, like Palor, like all these other gods. And so, I mean, even with famous D&D characters, people can feel that you are not role-playing them appropriately. And there's so much lore that I think that's made me pretty gun-shy about role-playing existing D&D gods, because I don't want to let people down, I guess, or miss some like obscure piece of lore. But like, you know, once Lauren decided she wanted to worship Palor, I read a lot about Palor, certainly more than I had ever read about Palor before. And it was fun. There's some wackadoo shit about Palor. He rides on a tricrine. He's got a big golden city. I mean,
Yeah.
He
has a theme. He's really addicted to this theme. He really likes it.
On theme. He feels a little disco, to be honest. Like with all the gold. And he doesn't like, and that informs me about Palor a little bit. Like, he may be like this very beneficial god of light and all this stuff, but at the same time, I mean, what kind of dude just wears gold all the time, runs around on a tricrine, has an all golden city? I mean, he just seems a little like he has to have a little bit of an ego, right? And a little bit of like a game master from Thor Ragnarok vibe, even not full in there, but just a little bit of like, this dude walks around in robes, you know, kind of thing, relaxing. That's my take.
I don't know if we found out about Saranthus yet, about what her, do we know enough?
Do you know about what?
I feel like it's not worth
Saranthus
I have to be
is?
careful here. I don't want to do any spoilers.
I know, right? I don't want to ask, but I want to ask.
So for me, godhood is like a scary thing, and gods are a scary thing, what their motivations are. And I think I can tell you for Saranthus, she started with a very relatable fear that we all have. And actually, Hope roleplayed this exact moment. She told everyone Saranthus's backstory. So,
Yeah,
which
like
she did great.
It seemed very close to Penelope's backstory, but there were some real key differences, which actually is a little scary to think that, innocent little Penelope and Saranthus shared such a similar backstory. But yeah, to that moment, Penelope, or I guess Saranthus, was speaking as Saranthus, and it just came out so honestly.
And that was a coincidence. Saranthus was a god who had a world, and she warned them of something that was terrible that was coming to the world. Her followers didn't believe her. Not enough of them. And they died. And it broke her mind. So all she can think, and this is in spoiler territory because Hope literally said this out loud, it broke her as a person. Like, it's like having your friend right in front of you and you trying to warn them that there's like a car coming and they don't listen to you, kind of fear. And as a god, when you have that, what does that do to you? Like how do you reconcile that in your mind? Do you become this kind of, that's when you become the villain, when you're like, you have to believe me all the time, every single time, because you might die if you don't. And that comes from initially a place of wanting to save people, but also it's horrifyingly evil at the same time.
That was the interesting point. You and I you'd been sending me stuff about Saranthus so I could learn about her, and in my mind I'm like, oh yeah, Saranthus is the one that killed me, the one that killed Briv, and is evil and has this horde of dark army and all these undead. Of course she's a bad guy. But then, like, one of the last emails you sent me right before we went on the show, you were like, Saranthus believes that she's doing the right thing. She's the good guy in her mind. And I'm like, whoa, duh. Of course, every bad guy thinks they're the good guy. They have their just cause for doing things. So that completely shifted how I was going to play it because, as she says in that backstory, I want people to believe in me. And that's all she wants. That's what she's gathering an army. That's what she said to the heroes of the Vale, is just believe in me. If you believe in me, you can live, and it's that moment of she's not trying to be a bad guy. She's, in her mind, she's saving people. And that's true and honest.
And super creepy. And that's the stuff that terrifies me. So I always make villains. I always try to make villains with a hint of like a piece of you, right? I think that's a good thing as a dungeon master or even a player. You take like maybe the thing that is not something you love about yourself and you put that into a villain, right? Because like I think we've all had those moments where like you felt like one of your friends didn't listen and something bad happened. And that's all Saranthus is that moment. I think that's a relatable way to play gods and try to find their motivations. And why I homebrew. Because I can't do that with Pelor. I don't know what Pelor's motivation is, other than just really being into gold.
And yet I'm still willing, like in my games, I don't care what's been written. I know it's a little different when you're streaming a game. But my personal, I've talked about this before. I will destroy Waterdeep. I will kill all the gods. I will play characters that are in the in the backstory, however I want to make my players happy. As long as my players are happy, I don't care. I destroy everything.
Lauren, I want to see Lauren destroy Waterdeep. Come on.
Make Waterdeep.
Red Larch doesn't exist. Red Larch no longer exists
and make
in
the
my
dungeon
world.
Like have some horrible wish spell where the dungeon becomes Waterdeep and Waterdeep becomes the dungeon. So all of Undermountain is like a reversed pyramid of just chaos and madness.
That'd be awesome.
The people underneath can never get out. Like all the good people of Waterdeep are trapped underneath this mountain of pure madness. I think that would be charming. Sorry, different campaign.
No, if you want a great start to a campaign about, well, why would you ever go under Mountain? Well, there you go. Let's, let's go rescue people. Let's go find things.
That's cool.
One of a few last other questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Arlener wants to know, are your alignments from a cosmic force or are they just a description? Kind of going back to our chat from a moment ago, which, when your gods come pre-made with alignments, it's an interesting question. Do they come pre-made with a point of view?
I usually do like a cosmic force. If I'm going to use alignment, then I'll do something like a cosmic force that is active in the world, or it describes like a great conflict or something. Usually powers greater than deities operate on that scale.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of the Joker, right? Like, I am an agent of chaos. There's something like horrifying about that statement, like that, and that is probably the best example of a philosophy cleric I can come up with for anyone. The Joker just is a believer in chaos, nothing else. That includes him dying. He's okay with it. He believes in chaos. That's the scariest philosophy cleric you could ever play because there's no guidance for that dude. So, I tend to play alignment that way as well. And of course, like a polarity. I'm saying that very weird, and when I say out loud, but like there's a magnetic force behind alignment to some degree. I think makes a little bit of sense. I would never force that upon players, though. So.
Yeah, I think like mortals it'd be a scale that they don't register on. And so they could say like, oh yeah, I guess I'm with this camp or, or on this side. But at that level, you're really just incapable of affecting the outcome. It's more like, this is my favorite football team. I mean, that's sort of how I see it at that scale. And it's only until you get like higher levels or start dealing with other entities that comes into play.
Yeah, this reminds me very specifically of like I will mess around with planes that are alignment focused, and I think it's I don't know if it's Biotopia or whatever, but it is a place where if you spend too much time there, you become lawful good, or at least neutral good. And I set a very evil adventure where this place is basically used as a prison for fixing the evil that is in the world, and. It's kind of horrifying because they will send demons, beholders, all kinds of things to this prison and re-educate them. Right. Which is another like weird, evil way to use alignment, right? Like, okay, you're going to become lawful good whether you want to or not, because if you spend too much time in those planes of existence, you change. If you're in the Beastlands too long, you will become a beast. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I tend to do it. And it's a fun thing for DMs to play with. When you are on a plane of existence that is feeling that radiation or that frequency higher than normal, that can be a terrifying thing to feel you lose yourself.
Especially if you sort of like conceive of the outer planes as like a state of consciousness that you inhabit and not a physical place. Now, this is going to get weird because most of the time we think of it as portals and you have a key or something like that. But for a long time in D&D, the main spell you used to get out there was Astral Spell, which projects your spirit to these places that then sort of constructs a body for them. And so I've always sort of saw it as like all of those places, because they're alignment focused. Like if they were a physical thing, they'd be an inner plane. That's where all the physical stuff is. And so this is more spiritual and involving states of conscious. So yeah, if you it's like if you spend all of your time in an evil realm, if your mind is cast to the abyss, if you spend too much time there, then you're polluting your mind. Literally your spirit with it, and then when you come back, it's going to have changed you. So I really like that idea of it, the experience of traveling the planes changing the planeswalker. That's why they always gotta move on. Can't stick in one place too long.
That's why my main character Eberron is wackadoo crazy. He's been walking the planes for like thousands and thousands of years, and he's not playing with a full bag anymore. He doesn't even know if his alignment is his own choice,
man. Like the prime material is your home. You're all out here in these cosmic mind realms, and just I imagine that would change you. And that's where the gods live, right? So how is it like, are they a source of it? Are they the cause of it? Or are they like, or are there sort of
are
like
they the victims of it?
Yeah, are they the victims of it?
Did you get so powerful? Yeah,
right. Yeah, exactly. They got so
all
powerful
at the same
that they
time.
can't escape. Yeah. You can't.
The
give up
very
that
intense
power.
Discussion about this.
Yeah.
But
well, then if you
think
compete for followers,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
but-
the kind of thing that you kind of have to think about, even if you haven't up until you get into the higher levels of a campaign, because at least historically, but also just in my campaigns, once you reach those higher levels, then people not just in the world have taken notice of you, but even the gods that were ignoring you are paying attention to you, and you're going to have to start dealing with these other forces. And so having a vague idea of like, well, what do they want? If you are suddenly butting up against a god who wants something, but now these level 19 adventures are coming along and messing everything up, suddenly you have to deal with that. And having those conversations with yourself and with your players ahead of time. Well, this is how this all works, and this god is going to show up, and this is kind of what you know about them. Having all that conversation ahead of time is good, because eventually people are going to want to fight them.
Yes, absolutely. And if you get on their radar, like if you cast Wish 3 times in a row, like the gods are going to take a note. If you burn an entire world, say, using a primordial to the ground, gods are going to know who your name is. If a god impersonates you, people are going to know your name. Why did this god impersonate this person? Once you get on people's radar, things get it's a mixed blessing. Not to make a pun. So I think that's a good way to take that. I think we have time for one really very, very quick question, unless anyone else has something to add. Hope?
Man, gods, they're
I mean, gods.
What do you
they're
have to
a
do?
whole bag. They're a whole bag.
It's a good topic, though. Like, it's a really
really
strong
is.
topic to talk about and to like figure it out.
It's
Well, I have a
not
question.
something that a lot of people think about. Yeah.
No. So Todd has obviously created gods. I've talked about creating gods for my campaign. Hope, Jim, have either of you ever wholesale homebrewed a god?
Oh yeah, myself. Lots of them. In the beginning, it was like ripoffs of.
I thought you meant yourself, as in you're like, yes, Jim Davis, the
Well,
god.
yeah, for me, of course, right?
I play in that campaign.
Come on.
I am going to be a worshiper of Jim. Thank you. I am the web
Jim
DM
domain.
Yeah, you broke through the fourth wall, right? Like
There you go. Web
know.
DM domain. I'm
you go.
there.
Automatic rerolls on everything. I've created a bunch of them. In the beginning, they were sort of like ripoffs of PHP stuff, and then I was inspired by real world religions. And then when I felt like I was maybe doing them a disservice and not, portraying them as sensitively as I could, I tried to start creating my own unique stuff. And I've run everything from this fantasy world has one god. It's the one. Don't try to say, and instead you sort of worship saints and intercessors. That's where all the different domains come from. But the illuminated one doesn't answer prayers. It lives at the top of that mountain. But this was a world in which we were playing sort of like the moments after creation. And so the gods and all their agents were still very real in the world, because like nothing had been said about the world yet. It was still in the act of being created. And then the ones that I do now, like I said, it's a much more cynical view of like godlings and demigods and pseudo gods and mystery cults and, hero worship and things like that. So that it's, if you want to play like a traditional, I worship this god and I'm a cleric with the mace and holy symbol, you can. Or if you just want to take a cleric and be like, it's just another kind of mage. I was trained by Baba Yaga to do something, or a Sphinx, taught me the ways of white magic or something like that. Then you just play a cleric and reflavor it. That's how I run nowadays.
Yeah.
Very cool. How about for you, Hope?
No, it's never really crossed my mind that I could create a god. I don't know why, but I mean, like in my brain, there's plenty of gods to play with. So I just usually pull from that. But I do encourage that, like when my players come to me with a character point of like, I actually I worship this god that I actually created, and I'm like, well, give me all the story points, give me their backstory, so I can, put that in the story. Somebody who's created their own god that fits what they wanted for their character. I totally encourage that, and I love seeing that come from characters, from players.
Awesome. This was another great, fantastic discussion. I really love doing this new format for the show. Thank you everyone for watching, for watching God Talks. Thanks so much to our guests, Hope LaVelle, Lauren Irvin, and Jim Davis. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been informative and has or also potentially a nightmare for your future DM. So thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.